Ah, Stansbury. Hershel's hometown where the hills are high and the architecture looks like every building is about to collapse. This quaint little town lies in the middle of Miracle Mask's incredibly predictable story that holds some very strong memories for our titular professor. Unlike Volsense, this curious village doesn't connect to any national transport network. In fact, there's not even a single car or vehicle throughout the entire town. And because Level 5 had the ingenious idea at this point to remove all the maps from the game, instead leaving us with Minecraft chunks, I couldn't exactly piece a map together and compare that to another town, like I did in finding Volsense. But what if I told you there was another way of finding Stansbury? A way that didn't rely so heavily on geographical information or transport infrastructure. A way that relied on the power of voice. I'm DearestHershel, and welcome back to another puzzle solved. So I'm sure you're all wondering now how we're going to find Stansbury using the power of audio, because no one actually specifically walks up at any point in the games and just says, "This is where Stansbury is, it's in Cheshire." They don't. I'm already going to state right now that I don't think it's very likely we'll be able to find a perfect town or village the same way we did in finding Volsense. However, we should still be able to find a general area of the UK that Stansbury's in by listening into the voices, the accents and the dialects of the people that lived in Stansbury. And lucky for us, a certain someone has said quite a few things in the 6 games he's been in. "But dearest," I hear you all scream, "Layton hasn't always lived in Stansbury. What if he picked up his accent from somewhere else that he lived?" Well, first of all, don't call me dearest, that's just weird. And second of all, let's take a quick look at the Layton timeline. Using the 1960 theory I mentioned in episode 3 of APS, we can determine that Layton was born to
Spoiler alert!
Leon and Rachel Bronev in 1925, though was later adopted by
Spoiler alert!
Roland and Lucille Layton about 3 or 4 years later in about 1929, moving to Stansbury. Layton lived here from 1929 until
Spoiler alert!
Randall's supposed death in 1942, wherein he moved away from all the bad omens surrounding him and his crookedy house to London, where he lived for the next 20 years in houses such as this one and this one, before Level 5 decided it would be much better to let another one of his adopted children take over and completely ruin the franchise's legacy with fashion and food. Where was I? Assuming that Layton has lived in Stansbury from the ages of 4 to 17, I'd say there's a very high chance that the majority of his accent and choice of dialect was picked up here. So now let's talk about accents. As a public service announcement to anyone watching this that doesn't live in the United Kingdom, let me begin by stating that there is no such thing as a British accent. It's not real, doesn't exist. What people think of when they hear a British accent is actually called RP, and RP stands for Received Pronunciation, from which there are very different types and degrees of it. Standard RP is the kind of thing you'd hear from newsreaders or people of power or political influence. It's not necessarily posh, but it's still pretty formal. The posh one, however, is called heightened RP, and it's the kind of voice that you'd hear on, say, Downton Abbey or from Descole when he thinks he has the upper hand.
I'm afraid all of the deductive reasoning in the world won't change the fact that I've already won.
And finally, contemporary RP is a much more modern take on RP, hence the name. And it's the kind of thing you'd hear from young people or radio DJs that have a much more relaxed audience on their shows. For example, in standard RP, you pronounce this word as shelf, pronouncing the L. Though in contemporary RP, you don't really need the formalities of it so much, so you can just say shelf, which is a bit more how I talk. Of these 3 types, Layton fits somewhere between standard and contemporary, though it doesn't really help to find out where Stansbury is, because this type of RP is spoken across the whole country. In a 2013 interview, Christopher Robin Miller, Layton's voice actor, said that he based Layton's voice on that of Anthony Hopkins. Hopkins being from the south of Wales, in Cardiff, though he was educated at the Royal Shakespeare down in London. This mix of a growly South Wales accent with a bit more standard RP mixed in really doesn't really help to narrow down to one particular area of the UK. So we'd have to do a bit more work. There are some areas of the UK that we can pretty much immediately eliminate because Layton doesn't have strong accents from them areas. For example, Sunderland, or Birmingham, or Somerset, and I'm sorry for butchering all 3 of those, but he's not from them areas because obviously he doesn't sound like that. Then again, nor do I. And so if we can't just immediately get a location from just that, the only way we'll be able to solve this is to listen to every single one of Layton's spoken lines from each of the 6 games. And who in their right mind would want to do something like that? There's a lockdown going on, there's nothing better to do. To be fair, Layton doesn't really say much outside of the cutscenes in this game, although we can still see, or rather hear, some of the things that give us an idea of Stansbury's location. Notice how Layton says this.
2 months ago, Baron Augustus Reinhold passed away.
And
Shortly after his death, his will was disclosed. The contents of it were fascinating, to say the least.
or even,
Every puzzle has an answer.
the way Layton says past, answer and after puts a lot of emphasis on the harder ah sound rather than the r sound. It's common for this kind of accent to be spoken in northern areas of the country, whereas southerners like myself would say past and after. However, Layton isn't a complete northerner, thank God, as he still says,
It seems she came across my name by chance when reading an article about me in the papers.
putting an R emphasis into the word chance. Other than that, though, there aren't any particular clues that could lead us to where Stansbury could lie. The best game in the series now, and Layton has quite a few more things to say in this one. 88 lines to be precise. Generally, there aren't any specific dialect words or phrases here that could put Stansbury somewhere concrete, though Layton's accent is fighting once more, this time giving harder ah sounds in lines like,
The scenario you paint certainly isn't out of the realm of possibility.
and,
I believe we've all committed a large and rather unfortunate oversight.
but also allows a few R's to slip in, such as in,
The only person who could know what the Elysian box looks like is the suspect you're after.
but with no more new leads, we moved on to the next game. Bloody hell, Layton hardly keeps his trap closed in this game, giving me over 220 lines to sift through, most of which gave me no new leads. Great. Much like in the previous games, Layton gives a right mix of ahs and ahs in this one, though this is the first game when he uses a word or phrase that could potentially link to a location. When trying to speak to Luke through the door, Layton states that
Luke means to test our mettle with a puzzle.
a phrase invented by Jacobean playwright John Fletcher, who was born in Sussex, which is right down here, but then educated in Cambridge, which is all the way over here. But at least we've got actual locations. Next game. Now, I can already hear you screaming at your screens, Dearest, you forgot Miracle Mask! Oh my god! Well, first of all, what did I say about calling me Dearest? And second, there's a very good reason for that, which we'll get back to very shortly. Of all the lines I researched for this episode, this game was the hardest to do, as I had to manually sift through an entire playthrough looking for all of Layton's spoken lines, as there were no existing records of this on the internet. It was an absolute nightmare, because I found absolutely nothing of use. Boom! Now we're on to the big one. The only game where Stansbury is ever mentioned, and fortunately for us, walking around Stansbury gives us not one, but 9 people who may hold the secret to Stansbury's location in their voice. Not everyone in Stansbury has spoken lines, though fortunately there are a few tidbits of information that can help us. Starting with Layton, Hershel refers to his parents as Ma and Pa, which is more common to hear around the north of England and the south of Scotland. Though according to this map by Reddit user Verocchio, that shows where Ma is commonly spoken around the UK, there's a curious cluster up here around Cheshire and Lancashire. In a spell of frustration and fear, Angela lashes out at Randall and calls him a clod. Harsh. The word clod is most commonly said in the northwest of England, specifically around the Lancashire area. I'm sensing a theme. However, there are still a few things I want to address. See, Randall says mask instead of mass, Angela's accent is leaning towards a slightly heightened RP, everything Daltin says is incredibly northern, Collins has an incredibly heightened RP, Henry speaks with a slightly northern Layton says this, and then Layton says not taking into consideration that Daltin says this.
You think, Layton?
And it was at this point in the search that I finally broke. Every time I found a potential location, a new character or line would waltz in and completely change where in the UK I was looking. How foolish was I to think that I could find a town using just accents and dialects? All this time wasted on such a niche project that kept me up late into the night writing up documents and scanning through encrypted files. All for nothing. Nothing! But I wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. See, every character with lines in the Stansbury section is pretty well off. Randall and Dalston are the sons of prominent businessmen. Collins is a lecturer at a well-established academy. Henry is one of the servants for the wealthiest family in town. Angela is the daughter of a prominent family. And given the size of Hershel's house, I doubt his parents are blue-collar workers either. As much as I hate to generalise people, I feel like none of these people would be caught talking with anything other than at least standard RP. The only exception is Daltin, who is frequently mentioned to be the rebel of the group. Perhaps all the formalities at Dalston Manor have annoyed the man so much he's unafraid to speak with his true local accent of the north. Pushing through the pretentiousness of those around him, Dalston's voice takes prominence in the crowd, jarring viciously with the poshos in the ostentatious town.
You set me up with this stupid letter just to get me out here because you're not man enough to face me yourself! Coward!
So, with a general location now in the bag, it was time to bust out the maps. From the in-game artwork and cutscenes, we can see that Stansbury has an academy, a manor house, a river, nearby hills or mountains, at least 3 churches and a nearby forest. Using Dalton's accent, I narrowed down the search to the counties of Lancashire, Cheshire, West Yorkshire and Derbyshire. I then started looking at towns in each of those counties that had what I needed to find, and the easiest way to narrow it down was to look for the academies. This gave me a list of precisely 50 locations, though some towns and cities were home to more than one academy, meaning the actual location list was actually only about 30. And of those 30, only one town fit the bill. Just. Accrington is a large town in the Hinburn borough of Lancashire, formerly known for its cotton and textile industry, as well as being home to the hardest bricks in the world, apparently, some of which were used in the construction of the Empire State Building. Fun fact. The town is home to many large manors, much like Randall's one, though the river that once ran through it has been culverted, with only some parts still above the ground. Sitting comfortably on the western edge of the Pennines, the town is surrounded by hills, a little different to the mountains around Stansbury, but not too far from the truth. And while it's considerably larger than Stansbury, it's still the closest thing we have to this fictional little village. And with Stansbury firmly back on the map, that right there is another puzzle solved.